I think so. I think we've got some folks coming in.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We are so excited to have you join today's webinar. We're going to be getting started in just a moment. We want to allow for full quorum and give folks a chance to trickle in. So we invite you to just take a breath, give yourself a little bit of transition time and space, and we'll be getting started momentarily. And while we wait for folks to join, if those of you who are here could please share where you're dialing in from, what city, where you located. Also, to orient you to today's conversation, we do have the chat feature available. Please drop a conversation in the chat. We also have the question and answers featured available. If you have questions, please share your questions in that space for us. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to get through today and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Our conversation today, who owns your brand now, AI algorithms, and the new rules of engagement, is being presented by Fenton Communications. I am Shakirah Hill Taylor. I am the head of innovation overseeing the Center for Innovation at Fenton. Fenton is an integrated strategic communications agency specifically focused on social impact. We represent the country as largest nonprofits, foundations, and corporate social good entities. And I have the distinct pleasure of being joined by Melissa Knight. Melissa, I will allow you to introduce yourself.
Amazing. Thanks, Shakira, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Knight, and I am lucky enough to be a product counsel for Google. Specifically, I product counsel the Chrome browser. So if you've ever used the Chrome browser to search the web and navigate, thank you so much. And my day to day kind of involves looking at how the corporate infrastructure, user trust, data privacy, and web ecosystems intersect. It's a really interesting time to chat about all things AI. And so I'll be putting a little bit of a legal and regulatory spin on our conversation today. And I'm so excited to dive in with Shakira to kind of bridge that gap between communication strategies and practical frameworks to make this sustainable for you all.
Wonderful. And I think that is a great transition, Melissa, to talk about how we're going to spend our time together this afternoon. It's really important for Melissa and I to ensure that when you leave today's conversation, you will be leaving feeling like you have practical, hands-on awareness of how AI, and specifically in this context, large language models and agentic models are reshaping the way that consumers and supporters are engaging with brands. We also want to make sure that this is a space for curiosity. And so we welcome you bringing your questions, even if they're a bit expansive outside of this particular scope. We know that the acceleration of AI is bringing up a lot of things that folks are thinking about, particularly as it relates to how we engage writ large. And so we're going to start today by talking about what AI actually is. And we could spend a whole 3 weeks unpacking artificial intelligence. But for this conversation, we're going to dial in on large language models and agentic models. So we want you all to leave with a working vocabulary for this aspect of artificial intelligence. And then we're going to dive into how AI is reshaping brand visibility and consumer engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about what the collapsing consumer journey looks like, what's replacing it, and why we shouldn't be afraid, what that means for how we pivot in this landscape. We're also going to talk about building infrastructure and resilience in this shifting landscape. Melissa is going to give us a really good walkthrough on why governance matters and why waiting is no longer free, why we need to be thinking with a governance mind frame. And then we want to open the floor for questions and conversation. But before we get into that, we want to launch a poll because we want to understand what you all's relationship is with AI as it exists today. And we want to understand through the framework of what hesitancies you might be having as it relates to AI. And so I'm going to invite the ColorComm team if you can launch our poll for today. Awesome. So our poll asks, what concerns do you have about AI? Is it a lack of governance and regulation? Is it fear of job loss, climate impact, diminishing creative and critical thinking? We'll give everyone a moment to respond to today's poll. Kim says she wished she can answer more than one. Kim, you're welcome to put any follow-up would in the chat for us. All right. And then ColorComm team, just let us know when we have all our responses in and let's show our results. All right. Wow. So in the lead here, we have diminishing creative and critical thinking as one of the leading concerns that folks have about AI. Right behind that, in a near tie, fear of job loss, and then lack of governance and regulation. And then, of course, the climate impact. Melissa, when you see these results, do these feel resonant from things that you've been hearing and learning on the product side?
Absolutely. I think anytime you work in a place where responsible innovation is at the forefront, we ask ourselves these questions. Who's asking for the integration of AI into the browser? Who's asking for kind of an assistant? And what do they want out of that, right? I don't think most of our users would say, I would really like to not have to think critically right now, or I'd really like to be less creative.
Right.
And so the way, at least at Google, that I've seen us design our products is more on the let's be a thought partner with you, right? So you're not diminishing your creative and critical thinking, you are adding to it. And that is, I think, especially true in seeing your results and tweaking your initial response or request to the AI, and you learn how to work with it. I personally think there isn't going to be a time where you don't have to think critically, even when engaging with these models that are meant to make your life a bit easier. It's really just giving you access to a larger swath of information, allowing a system, I mean, kind of getting into the definition of an LLM, right? It's trained on massive amounts of text all across the internet, and then it mimics language. but you are the one that is really driving the meaning and the intention and the creativity behind it. I think I'm especially interested in the folks who think about the lack of governance and regulation, because I think a lot of people think AI is just kind of the Wild West.
Mm,
And what I can say, at least from my experience, is that that is not the case. The
mm,
folks I work with on a daily basis are really thinking through the implications down the road. They're thinking 10 and 20 years down the road to, you know, because once you've opened a box, it's really hard to close it. And so they're thinking really critically about how to make sure that there is regulation, there is governance, there are policies, if they're internal or external.
mhm.
Um, and then finally, I think the fear of job loss is very real, but I also would encourage folks to remember that over the last 50 to 100 years, there have been all of these kind of booms, these internet booms, uh, the industrial revolution as a boom. And it may change the job market, but there's always more opportunity that comes out of it. So let's try to reframe and think about AI as something that is exciting and opening up new opportunities.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Melissa. So let's talk about what is AI in the context of this conversation, particularly as it pertains to brands and why it matters for this moment. So when we are thinking about the impact of AI on brands and the brand journey, and I'm using brand as a broad-based nomenclature. An organization can be a brand, an enterprise can be a brand. And so I just want to make sure we have shared language for our time. There are two avenues in which we're seeing impact, and Melissa and I are going to unpack them both. The first is large language models, or what we hear in common parlance referred to as an LLM. This is your natural language processing model, like a Chat GPT, like a Claude. Gemini, would we consider Gemini a large language model? Because Gemini has so many
Yes.
other products tied to it, but like a Gemini, this is where someone can run either a query or prompt and they get back contextualized responses based on large swaths of data that the model has been trained on. The reason why we're seeing the brand journey change as it pertains to large language models is because in traditional search, and by that I mean someone would run a query through Google and they would get back a series of options that they could choose from. This is where search engine optimization was going gangbusters because brands could say, we know that folks, when they're trying to find an option that we want to be a part of, will search these series of keywords. As an example, I'm a shopper. I love a good fashion find, and so I may search something like Amina Maudi sale. And then I'll get a series of options and where the shoes may be on sale. What is changing is that when someone runs either a query or a prompt, and I'll explain the difference between the two, a query or a prompt in a large language model, that model is erasing, or I would say collapsing, the experience of swathing through options and is giving more contextualized answers. And so I may run a query, that same query in I'll use Gemini for the purposes of this conversation. You know, Amina Maudi said, where can I find the Amina Maudi sale? And Gemini will bring back a contextualized answer because what the large language models are doing is querying based on trust. What is what it is identifying as trusted online data sets that it can pull back and bring me a set of answers versus a Rolodex of options. And we're seeing now the need for organizations and brands to think about how they're contextualizing the way that they reference themselves. Because before, consumers used to search for options. Now they're looking for consensus. And consensus is something an algorithm decides before your brand ever enters the room. And so, large language model will bring you contextualized answers. Search will give you options. But now, in our accelerated environment where there's a plethora of content to filter through, we're finding that consumers really want to get to that consensus rather than having to search through their options. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like on the agentic side, Melissa.
Absolutely. So if you're thinking through a traditional vanilla search, think of that as going to Filene's basement. There's a lot of great stuff in there, but you've really got to sift through it. What Shakirah just mentioned to you, the LLM, think about that as going into the Gucci store. You know that you want to get that purse, you go right in, it's right there, you pick it up, you're good. You've got your search. Your agentic I like to think of as your personal shopper.
Mhm.
They are essentially taking um, that advanced autocomplete that your traditional AI is doing, and it's almost taking that with its own autonomy. It's using that LLM as a brain, but it connects to loops of perception, reasoning, planning, tool execution, and depending on the comfort of the agent, it can break the task either into some steps for you. It can use external APIs to do something for you. It can evaluate its own progress. It can adjust its strategy. It's a lot smarter. And so, where your searches are collapsed, the journey is collapsed when you're dealing with an LLM. The agent is collapsing it entirely by shifting it from kind of your list of links to an intent driven task executor. I love it because it eliminates my tab fatigue, it creates more flow. And the self correction of the agent is, I think, my favorite thing. Maybe it's a little scary because, wow, it can correct itself, but it really helps cut out the need to have to double check the hallucination.
Yeah, and so in this ad, and thank you for that. I love the personal shopper, going into the store, being directed to the exact item that you want to purchase, but then having that personal shopper add on the additional layer. Just think about that from your own perspective of whatever brand that you exist within that perhaps you're representing as part of today's conversation and what that means for how folks interact with being able to find your brand, whether you're representing an enterprise or organization. A lot of the clients that we represent here at Fenton, our mission-based organization. And so it's really important that in the collapsing of this journey, organizations and brands are thinking about, well, then how do we create a contextualized model that when folks are running a query, which is basically asking a question, so, where can I find the amenability sale versus a prompt, which is, tell me the last time that Amina Maudi offered a 40% off clearance question versus a directive. So thinking about how you reshape the way that you frame your brand and the work that you do so that as people do queries and prompts, you're getting them to that direct consensus. All right, so a little bit of data to help add additional layer of context around what Melissa and I are sharing. what we currently see is that, search didn't shrink. Search will still be a necessary model for brands and organizations to think about. But the way that people interact is reshaping. So the click journey is changing. What we're finding as of 2025 is that about 60% of Google searches now end without a single click to any website. Again, folks are having a bit of optional fatigue. And so they want to get to that consensus a bit faster. But we are seeing 20% of queries trigger an AI overview. So if you're using Chrome, if you're using Gemini, we do see that we're getting that contextualized search response with an AI overview. So again, as you're thinking about the context in which your brand sits in, how do we bring that contextualization so that when people are running their queries, we are coming up as part of those either AI overviews or the large language model consensus and contextualized responses. We're also seeing 93% of searches in Google's AI mode in without ever leaving the answer pane. And so it's not allowing, or not the product itself, but people are not completing that previous journey that they used to complete. These are not disruptions that should scare us. As Melissa said a moment ago, we should think of innovation as opportunities to reinvent, and to rethink our models. And so we like to leave each point of our conversation with a takeaway. And I think the takeaway here is that large language models look for patterns, clarity, and consistency. So when you are developing your communication strategy, your marketing strategy, thinking about the content that you put on, if you have an organizational blog, if you're doing any earned media pitching, making sure that you have clarity and consistency and that you're maintaining a level of brand authority that is going to bring you up in these queries. One earned media hit, because we do media relations, and that is very helpful for that brand authority, is not going to be enough. What the large language models and the agentic models are looking for is repetition and reinforcement that give your brand weight in those AI answers, whether it's coming through the LLM or it's coming through the summarization. All right. So, here are some things already that you can start to put in place as you're thinking about your infrastructure. And Melissa, again, I invite you to just layer in as we go through each. And we want you to think about putting these things in place this quarter because we don't want folks walking away without practical tools that you can use today. First is be aware that large language models are listening, but we want to make sure that they're listening to the right things and that we have the appropriate infrastructure set up so that if you're using social listening tools within your role or your organization, be cognizant of how they index large language models like your GPT, your Geminis, your Perplexities, and your Claudes, and how they're describing your brand. Because it's not just what's said on social, it's also, again, that brand authority that you're creating through things like your own content, so your blogging, any thought leadership that you're doing, and also any earned media placement that can help bring broader contextualization when those large language models are listening.
Just to add in there, this is not just, it used to be that you would kind of scour the internet and see how different websites, blogs, what have you, are describing your brand as a PR exercise. It's no longer just a PR exercise, it's also a trademark and reputational risk assessment.
Mm.
You need to know if your brand is being associated with incorrect claims or infringing contexts within the model outputs so that, to Shakirah's earlier point, you can start to have one message that goes out that the LLM can properly interpret the tone and the meaning and the message behind your brand.
That's so good. I love that. That reputational risk assessment and protection is so critical now more than ever because of the pervasiveness of data sets that large language models can query. And that brings us to the second point. Rebuilding your awareness funnel. The old funnel assumed that the brand was discovered through search. We talked about that a moment ago, right? Someone ran a query through search, it brings up the options. Today, that discovery path looks different. It happens inside the model. So the new path becomes something like a prompt. Tell me the last time Amina Maudi had a 40% off sale. The model brings up an answer with a citation because of good brand authority. That citation could be, an earned media article about how Amina Maudi did so well in the last 4 quarters because they ran really good sales, and then maybe a visit. So no longer are we just going search to options. Now we have a more contextualized pathway that folks are filtering through to determine if they want to make that conversion click. And then the third is having a protected source corpus. And this goes back to the point that Melissa was just making, which is how important it is to understand your reputational equity. So the pages, the briefs, the earned media coverage that the models cite now become a part of your brand infrastructure. They were always there, but often brands treated these as siloed efforts. You had your earned media infrastructure over here, you had your marketing infrastructure over there, you had your owned infrastructure here. Now they're becoming something like an overlaid Venn diagram. And we want to treat these like interconnected products, your owned, maintained, measured ecosystem in which becomes your reputational and brand authority corpus that now these AI models are using to determine whether or not you have the weight and equity to show up as an option.
I just want to double down on that, Shakira, because this is such an important point. Not to be that lawyer, but I would also, once you have identified what your corpus is, ensure that your legal teams are reviewing the terms of service when you use a third party platform to distribute your data or host your data. And also just keep at the forefront that protecting your intellectual property while ensuring that all of the data about your brand is accessible, is super important. And just the accuracy of being machine readable is like paramount.
Love that. And that is, you're so good at a transition because now we're going to talk about governance. And the reason why we wanted to bring governance into this conversation is because, one, as Melissa said at the top of our conversation, there are governance infrastructures being developed internally through the products themselves. And folks don't know that, right? If you're not somebody who is like nerding out on AI and innovation, like Melissa and I have the benefit of being able to do each day, you can miss that there are governance being put in place internally in the products. We also think it's important that organizations and brands are thinking about your own governance structures and how, just as Melissa said, like how you are integrating your legal department, your communications and marketing departments, and all of these respective disciplines are coming together to talk about what does it mean for us to both be interacting with artificial intelligence as it's reshaping the customer journey, but as we also build AI as part of our discipline, as part of our workflows, as part of our integrations. I was speaking to a gentleman from an enterprise. I won't name it because he didn't give me permission to share, but they are building a customer journey that allows customers to have different computations of a product using AI. So for the purpose of this conversation, let's say it's shirts, and you want to think about whether or not you should buy the pink shirt, the green shirt. Well, that computational model allows you to try on the shirts without ever leaving your house. You take a picture of yourself, and the AI model is trying on the shirts for you. When I asked about things like, creative rights behind the photo, well, then who owns that photo? What is your governance? And he was like, yeah, we haven't had time to think about that. But that creates a degree of risk. And so we don't want you all open to risk without fully understanding what those avenues are. And so I'm going to hand it over to Melissa to talk about governance.
Absolutely. And I really hope that this section doesn't scare anybody and doesn't feel too legally. So definitely give us some feedback in the chat to make sure that you're getting what you need out of this, folks. The way I think about governance in product counseling is I say, if you don't define your default, somebody else will. And if you're waiting for a perfect centralized global AI regulation in the United States so that you can then point to it and say, well, this is the black letter law and this is what we can do and this is what we can't do, you're going to be waiting for a really long time. The entire world is currently in a really kind of cool liminal space where we all have to operate in ambiguity. Sometimes that's normal in your industry, right? I'm in the tech industry. That's super normal because we're often kind of walking alongside regulators, but that's not the case everywhere. And so I encourage folks to really get used to and get comfortable with operating in ambiguity and establishing your own internal best practices and develop your brand risk tolerance. If you don't, you could potentially introduce data privacy, copyright, and operational risks, but you also risk somebody else telling you what you need to do, right? I really don't think that AI governance should be, a legal policy handed down from above. Rather, I think, and maybe this is because I work cross-functionally a lot, but I think it requires a cross-functional council. Your product folks, your legal folks, your communications folks, your engineers, your developers, all of that. What's technically possible? And then what's our budget for pursuing perhaps copyright issues? What is our budget for engaging with the companies who manage these large language models to make sure that they also have insight from different industries on what's working and what's not? What is your brand risk tolerance? And these are all questions that I proffer you need to answer now, but you can answer now. I wouldn't be a good former regulatory attorney if I didn't talk through kind of where we are from a regulatory space on AI. Globally, I work with regulators all over the world, and they are focused really heavily on transparency, accountability, and data privacy. If your team is adopting, and this is more if we're thinking through, is your team going to adopt any AI tools, perhaps for internal communications, external products? If you are using AI tools in your day to day, which I encourage everyone to do because I think it really cuts down on a lot of spin and churn. Some of the questions that they're asking is, where is the data going? Is it training a public model? Is your data training a public model? Who's accountable for the output? Is there a human that's in the loop to review it? Are we being transparent with our end user or our client? If you're starting to use AI generated communications or AI to help come to conclusions faster, are you disclosing that to your clients? They're kind of two sides of how AI can impact your day to day, and how it can impact your brand. And I encourage you to interact with both sides, as the end user of AI and the recipient of potential, what is the term you're using, Shakirah? Earned
Brand equity.
brand equity. I love that. Um, and then on the other side, as somebody who may be producing deliverables or output to another client using AI.
Yes.
That's kind of where I will pause and allow if Shakira, if you have any insights on the governance model.
Well, certainly I wouldn't try to talk out of turn when sitting with a product counsel, an esquire, but everything you're saying, when we look at it from the communications side, 100% agree, particularly the point that you made around bringing all the stakeholders to the table. One of the things that we see again with our clients and a lot of brands and organizations is missing that cross-functional conversation and moment. So 9 times out of 10, or I'll say 8 times out of 10, a brand will say, we need governance. And they will go straight to their counsel. They will go straight to their legal team and say, can you draw up, some governance guidelines for us? What they'll miss in that though is then how do we internally communicate that to our staff and to our team? How do we ensure that if your organization is reflective of any programmatic priorities? Basically, what my mom used to say, the left hand don't know what the right hand is doing, right? So being able to bring all of the appropriate and potentially impacted stakeholders to the table will create a more well-rounded guardrail system. More than that, though, we also want to see, and Melissa, I'm curious, if you agree, and I imagine that you will, but your governance as a living document that will evolve as the technology evolves. But if we don't even have that starting point as the technology and the innovation reshapes, now you're going to be working from a place of reactive deficit versus from an advantageous, proactive position of we've just been growing with the technology as it's been growing.
100%, I agree. I think all of your governance documents are living documents because, I mean, if not, is your brand staying static? Even if the technology wasn't moving at the speed of light, your brand should also change and grow and adapt to what's going on. And in that, you may have to recalibrate your risk tolerance. So, certainly, your governance documents are living and breathing.
And that risk tolerance piece, again, from the comms side, because often we'll interact with the client that is finding themselves in a moment of reputational risk. And now we are on the communications and marketing side, starting to widen the aperture of what we think about as risk. There was a time that a risk or from a comms lens was like someone said something bad in the press, or, maybe we had a disgruntled employee and they're like talking trash on social media. But now with generative AI creating both opportunities and risk, a reputational moment could be, someone took one of our brand videos and they like used AI to manipulate it. And so these are the things we want to be able to have our clients and brands or organization have a healthy appetite, being willing to think about and come to the table again with all the respective potentially impacted cross functions across your team to say, if this happens, what is our contingency plan? Are we prepared? What do we have in place? Maybe one of our freelancers, what is their appetite for us being able to feed perhaps something they created to us in a model that we can templatize. These conversations need to happen, and those in leadership need to be able to be willing to engage with them. I want to pause here to note that we're going to be opening the floor for questions. I think I saw Brittany dropped a question in the chat. If you have a question, please do either drop it in the chat or use the QA feature, because we're going to be coming around. But before we do that, we have some recommendations to get you started today. And so we're gonna share them with you, and then we'll open up the floor. So there are some. So we earlier we talked about things we want you to implement this quarter, and now we want to start thinking about things that you can move to in the next quarter. Because believe it or not, some way somehow we coming up on Q3 very, very quickly. So. The first is recenter your brand through the lens of AI. If you're not thinking about this right now, you're already light years behind. You want to start thinking about the way that AI, large language models, agentic models, and even generative models are going to be impacting the perception of your brand and your brand equity. So you can start by doing an audit of how the major models describe you today. So, running a query and Fenton, I will admit we do this quite often. We ask the models, what's the number one agency for social impact? And we will see whether or not we come up. And if we are coming up, how we are contextualizing. We run that against all the models. We run those queries on a fairly regular basis because we want to make sure that we're protecting our brand equity. And so when they're wrong, we want to go back to the cited sources to see what those sources are, and if there are any inaccuracies, to see what we can do to fix the materials that folks are going to be, that the models are going to be learning from. And also then map out a plan for our owned, when I say owned channels, I mean things like our website, our blog, our newsroom, to keep those things current and up.
Did we lose Shakira?
Hi everyone, I think Shakira might have some tech issues. We'll give it 30 seconds and see if she joins back.
I'm sure she'll join back. But what I can do in the meantime is I can go to our next point, which was just on standing up governance. My suggestion to everyone is to start small, but start now. Define what acceptable risk looks like for your organization. For instance, using generative AI for internal brainstorming, that's super low risk. Using it to generate unreviewed legal disclosures or customer facing financial advice, pretty high risk. So definitely put those guardrails in writing, spin up a company wide training like yesterday, and really feel a certain degree of autonomy, but responsibility to get it right. I'm getting a text from Shakira. She's on her way back. Hang on one
The
second.
irony of doing a presentation on innovation and then my laptop crashes. I'm back, everyone. Sincere apologies. But let's jump back in. Melissa, I think we were on number
You
two.
were on, I actually just covered number two while you were coming back. So you can pop to number three now.
Perfect. So let me just share my screen again for folks. And we'll get back in. All right. So you also want to make sure that you educate and engage your existing clients early. And we started to allude to this as we talked about governance and just thinking about what your healthy guardrails are, but also thinking about your marketing and comm strategy as an opportunity to see how are we bringing our clients into our journey earlier. Don't let them learn your AI posture from a third party. Bring them in before they read about it. And this exists outside of the spectrum of just technology. This again is just good brand equity hygiene. How are you engaging your clients and your stakeholders? What are the ways in which you're touching point with them so that as they are engaging with the large language models and agentic models and learning more, they're not doing so as wholly uneducated consumers of your brand and your organization. And then if you're regulated brief your regulators first. And I think, Melissa, this is something you can speak to with a bit more authority. But again, just giving folks a heads up with your privacy and security story, making sure that you're seeing that governance model as a living document and that you're bringing all of the appropriate stakeholders to the conversation and that you're not building your governance and your regulatory model in a silo because building it in a silo is not going to bring people along.
100%. I honestly think this point is really where what I do and what Shakirah does like really aligns. This is where legal and communications come together because if you're operating specifically, look, if you're operating in a regulated space, don't wait for an audit, don't wait for an RFI or a CID from a government entity. Come to them first. You don't want to be on the back foot. I also think about things my mom and grandmother said to me growing up. You know, if you come to me with a problem first, we can work on it together. If I find out about it and I have to come to you, it's a bigger problem, right? And so it's really important to be clear, concise, and early with your data privacy and security story. And being proactive just always builds trust with not just your clients, but also with regulators and other companies within your industry. And that's honestly the ultimate currency in the AI driven market.
And that really is the upshot of today's conversation is maintaining that trust, right? As again, AI accelerates and as we continue to see innovations reshaping this journey, what we really want is for all of you to maintain your brand equity, to maintain that brand trust, and to continue to engage with your stakeholders in the most authentic ways possible. And so now we want to open it up to questions from each of you. I did see a question in the chat earlier, and then ColorCom team, I don't know if folks have been dropping questions in the Q&A feature, but Brittany asked a question around jobs and if AI is going to create more jobs. I have a point of view. Melissa, I'm curious what your point of view is.
So I'm an optimist. And so I tend to think yes, right? AI is going to create jobs, but it also, again, is going to be a good thought partner to increase productivity and output. Um, Anytime there's one of these more tech focused booms, you'll see a little bit of a depression in the job market. That's normal. It's scary because that means that we've got a significant portion of our population either unemployed or underemployed, and no one ever wants that. But then there is always an upswing, right? Because then people start to say, hey, look, I can do this thing now that perhaps I couldn't do before. Or I was too scared to do something. And now I have the courage because I have this bevy of information at my fingertips and I can make things work. I know a fair amount of folks who have all these really great ideas for apps that could really help people's lives, but they're not coders, right? I'm not a coder. But now there's vibe coding.
Mm.
And so you can say, this is what I want this thing to do. And then the agent can go in and it can fix it and it can uh, restore different lines of code and do everything that honestly would have taken 5 engineers 6 months to do. Now you can do it in a weekend. And so somebody who previously would have had that barrier to entry because they didn't, they're not a CS major. Now they can join the force and they have this great idea. And so I think we're going to see a lot more independent work coming out of this, but people are going to be really fulfilled. I am very optimistic about what AI is going to do for the job market.
That's awesome. I like to talk about job creation through the lens of where I started my career. So and I don't know, what age range is represented on our webinar today, but when I started my collegiate journey, digital strategy, which was my previous role before I stepped into innovation, did not exist as a career pathway. When I was in college, Facebook was called the Facebook. It was a thing that only folks with a university email address could be able to access. And then as I was coming out of undergrad and then going through graduate school, this idea around digital strategy and digital marketing started to take shape. So a whole new industry was created because of social media, because of the way that we interact online. It created an entirely new ecosystem that we're still seeing benefactors of, the influencer model. Like I follow so many incredible influencers who've built entire careers off being within the creator economy. And so I do share Melissa's optimism around job creation. I agree, there will be jobs that will be created. We're already seeing that. A lot of the holding companies of many of the tools, so Anthropic for Claude, they are creating different types of roles. I think I saw a writer role that they were paying $300,000, to hire. And so we're going to start to see these new industries open up. I also think that to the point that Melissa just made around, everyone can create their own platform. So we are going to see a new entrepreneurial type of industry creative where essentially everyone is going to be their own consultant in some way and specialize in respective ways because we are seeing those gatekeeping traditional models collapse. I also think it's going to be really important that we continue to have the right people at the table as innovation takes shape. It is very meaningful to me that Melissa and I get to be two Black women having this conversation about the acceleration of innovation and technology. Because, and it's not a strange thing to note or absurd thing to note, that when folks like us are not at the table, when we're not asking the right questions around who gets to access your data, who gets to determine what equitable approaches to innovation look like, then there are segments of the population that do get left out from job creation. So the call to action here is for us to keep our feet on the necks of folks and make sure that there is responsible rollout of tools and that everyone gets a seat at the table as these new opportunities come online. Pun. Okay, Chrissy says, while I can see tailoring these tips to small brands, do you think it's feasible for a small brand to add these tips to their strategy? Chrissy, I think I'm understanding your question. Are you asking if a small brand can tailor our recommendations to what you shared today? If that is the question, yes. Okay, you said yes. Yes, absolutely. These tips are not just for large brands. If you are holding anything that you consider to be a brand, whether you're a large shop or a small shop, and where you're a new business entity, this is relevant to you today. It's also relevant for us as individuals because, in the same way that we have to protect our capital B brand equity, we also have to protect our own professional equity. Because the same way that someone can run a query on a brand, they can also run on each of us as individuals. So these are absolutely applicable no matter the size of your enterprise. Melissa, any thoughts there?
No, I think you hit it. And I want to make sure that we also get to the questions in the Q&A because we're
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
ones in the chat. Let's finish out what's in the chat and then we can go into the Q&A. Um,
Okay.
but I see that Ayana has asked, what are your recommendations on getting into more LLM search results when there are a few competitors ahead of a brand within specific industries outside of corporate blogs, for example? Are you saying that you would like, how do we, essentially, how do you move yourself up into the search aperture for the LLM so that you're considered perhaps ahead of another brand that is similar to yours?
Yeah, I think that's the question she's asking. And Ayana, confirm for us if that is in fact what you're asking. And the way I'm hearing that, so we know search engine optimization as an existing sort of strategy for search, querying and getting to the top of the search. What you're asking, if we're in fact interpreting it correctly, is around generative engine optimization. So how do I get my brand to show up when there are competitors ahead of me beyond your own channels? Couple ways of thinking about that. Yes, let's say my corporate brand is number 5. So, okay, you want to think about earned media. When was the last time you've had any earned media published around your brand? How recent are those? Because again, the large language model is pulling from trusted citations, and that earned media is a heavily weighted citation. So, are we doing any earned media? Is that earned media recent? Are there other blogs that are quoting and citing us that are trusted resources? Have we been writing any press releases? Do we have an updated press room? You want to think about your earned media strategy now as that opportunity for building that brand equity that the large language models are going to cite from. And so the more you can keep that current and fresh, the higher you'll see those rankings. But again, going back to what I said earlier, concise, clear, and consistent. So you want to make sure your press release is concise, clear, consistent. Your talking points that are used in your earned media strategy are appropriately contextualizing, and they're concise, clear, and consistent.
I think the other thing I would just recommend is making sure that you're thinking of like the key or buzzwords that may be used in some of the classifiers across the LLM. Now, we're not going to get into classifiers today because, again, we could spend 3 weeks on classifiers, but think through the buzzwords that you want associated with your brand or your message and make sure that that is just kind of like the foundation of your brand. Then also just making sure you've done all of the right things in the background with copyright and enforcing any sort of claims against infringement so that you maintain you are that brand. Regina has 2 really great questions in the Q&A. And so for how can we help AI reluctant individuals who are responsible from a governance standpoint increase their AI fluency? The first thing that I would do is I would get them a premium subscription to whichever AI. I personally think Gemini is great and is a safe place with where folks who maybe aren't as savvy or literate can understand that their data is safe, and to feel comfortable interacting with the model and then trying out the different suites of products that are offered through that use the underlying LLM, right? So some people might say, hey, look, I'm not so jazzed on Gemini. I don't really like it, but oh my gosh, Notebook LM is amazing. And I use it all the time because I can control the aperture of the search. So with Notebook LM, folks can throw in, an entire text of the GDPR, the entire text of the DMA, and then they can ask it questions and then create a podcast that they can listen to on the way to work about that. That could be a way to get them really excited. So premium subscriptions at the enterprise level, I would really suggest getting those because like the baseline ones for all of them, Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, they're fine. Definitely do the paid subscriptions. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead, Shakira.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, completely agree.
And then, do you have any advice on how to correct erroneous info that shows up in the models? I talk to Gemini like she's my annoying older sister. And so when she gets something wrong, I say, you're wrong. Don't like, you have to be very plain with her and say, you're wrong. This is not true. I was searching for an activity for my team to do out in California. I'm not familiar with the LA area. I was like, hey, I want to do a candle making course. I needed 10 minutes from my office. Here's this, this, and this. Gemini wanted to send me down to like an hour and a half south to like Orange County. And I was like, girlfriend, I said 10 minutes from my house. And she said, absolutely. Thank you so much for correcting me. I will correct this from now on. She has not made any directional mistakes from here on out. You need to think about Gemini or anything to be like a almost like an assistant. And if your assistant didn't get something right the first time, you're not going to be like, well, now I can't use you anymore. You'd say, hey, here's some feedback. Give it feedback so that it learns.
Awesome. And then real quickly, we'll wrap it up with Mercy's question around advice we have to talking to internal and external clients or audiences that might be AI hesitant or skeptical about your organization incorporating AI. If you're asking about clients and being skeptical about, maybe their consultant being hesitant around AI, I think transparency, transparency, transparency. That is the name of the game. How are we using it? Why are we using it? And what is the potential impact? We are coming up on time. And so I just want to invite folks to continue to connect with Melissa and me. You can scan the QR codes here on your screen. That'll take you directly to our LinkedIn pages where we can keep the conversation going. I want to say thank you to ColorCom for allowing us to host today's webinar. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. Thank you, Melissa, for bringing your time, your brilliance, and insight to this conversation. And then finally, I want to plug for folks if you would like to keep learning about everything from AI governance to large language models, please join the Fenton Learning Lab. We offer a series of very bite-sized, snackable trainings to help you continue growing in your AI and communications and marketing competency. And with that, I'll just go back to the screen again in case anybody didn't get our LinkedIn. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.